When I started getting into fashion, I was around the age of 15 or 16 years old. And to me, the primary function of fashion at this time was twofold. Number one, it was dressing in a particular way to get more attention from the girls that I liked in my school. And number two, it was dressing to look good in my respective sport, which for me was basketball. Fast forward to now, and I am 10 years older than that high school version of myself. Damn, time really flies. And specifically, over the last 4 years of my life, I have nosedived head deep into the world of fashion that I perceive to be the coolest aspects of fashion. From getting into streetwear to now leaving behind this idea that streetwear is the penultimate genre within fashion, to expanding beyond sneakers into boots, mules, loafers, and so many other types of footwear, as well as now being immersed into Japanese denim, Japanese Americana, workwear, and so many other beautiful genres that fashion has to offer. It has been quite the journey. But today's video is unlike some of the more level-headed, positive sort of videos that I usually make in the past. Rather, I'm going to talk about 5 unpopular fashion opinions that I've developed over the last 4 years or so, or I guess over the last couple weeks, because I've been thinking about these things for the last couple weeks. These opinions are a culmination of my experience engaging in fashion, and I'm really curious to see down in the comment section whether you agree with them or not. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Drew. What it do? It's nice to meet you. Let's talk fashion. Number 1, fashion isn't for everyone. This may seem like a bit of a weird oxymoronic thing to say, as everyone both has clothes and or wears clothes on a day-to-day basis. Fashion, whether we like it or not, touches each and every one of our lives in one way or another. But when I say fashion isn't for everyone, I'm speaking on something that requires a bit of nuance and definitely a bit of explanation. In my opinion, most people won't ever be able to or don't care enough to participate in fashion at a high level for several reasons. The first and most obvious reason, in my opinion, comes down to economics. There's a certain level of privilege that comes along with being able to afford the purchase of $50 plus t-shirts, $100 plus jackets, or $1,000 plus jeans. And even if you have the means to buy these items, if you can actually afford a $50 t-shirt, a lot of people view the act of consuming and participating within the fashion industry as a very superfluous act, something that I'll get to in more detail later. Which just means that even if you have the means to afford $50 t-shirts or $100 jackets or X amount of dollar items of clothing, the value of purchasing a particular product is always in the eye of the consumer. Some people don't see the value in spending $100 on a jacket, but will buy a $70 video game or a trip with their loved one on vacation and see that as more valuable. That kind of summarizes my first reason why fashion isn't for everyone. There's the economics aspect of it, and then there's also the individuals who have the money to actually buy a particular thing, or whatever side of the spectrum you're on, having the money or not having the money. And if you have the money, what's the point of engaging in such superfluous or extradited spending when you don't necessarily have to in a world that doesn't see style as what it used to? Reason number 2 is something that I've heard in varying ways, and most recently I watched a video by JQ, the fashion elitist, who kind of described this idea that I've also talked about in a lot of my previous videos, which is a lot of the coolest, most desirable items of clothing that are sought after, whether it be tops, bottoms, or whatever it may be. A lot of these items are made for specific body types that exist in specific regions of the world. These body types often favor the skinnier, leaner, sometimes taller, and relatively average torso or leg widths and lengths. If you don't know, I have lost a bit over 25 pounds over the last 9 months, which has been a huge source of confidence and reinvigoration for my personal style as a result of that weight coming off of my body and being able to fit into my clothes just that much nicer. My clothes fit better being 25 pounds down, and I can say that with assured confidence. My tops feel better. The entire silhouettes flow better. And when I look at my outfits and how I present myself, when I step into the mirror, when I step outside, I feel as though that my shape is akin to what I see when I watch runway shows or when I watch the kind of ideal look for what fashion people should look like. Now, I'm not saying I'm a model by any means at all, but there's something to be said about my style feeling as though it's improving in inverse relationship to how skinny I am as well. Now, think about yourself. Have you been in the gym? Have you been doing a lot of squats and your clothes fit a bit tighter? Or maybe you've lost a bit of weight or gotten taller or shorter or grown in a new way that your clothes either fit you better or no longer fit you the same way. That is kind of the second reason why I think fashion is not for everyone, and why I understand that for most people, when it comes to their particular body type, especially here in the United States, they take the path of least resistance because the clothes that they buy and their own body types are on this kind of fluctuating scale, and it rarely aligns perfectly. Now, I know that I just outlined 2 reasons why fashion isn't necessarily for everyone. In my heart of hearts, I consider myself to be an optimist and a relatively positive person, so I want to also inject some positivity and some good vibes into this video if I can. There are obviously ways to make fashion work for you. There are tons of brands that are optimized for inclusivity, and one of the best things about living in the time period that we're living in the fashion era that we're living in, is that these conversations around body inclusivity and longer inseam lengths and wider bust and wider fitting pants, they exist and are growing and are ever prominent. But I still think that the big fashion industry, the big fashion machine, it still tends to lean more towards specific body types and specific people wearing the clothes, specific kids being the cool kids. That's just my opinion. And to kind of piggyback off this, there's a bit of exclusivity that does happen in terms of who gets to wear the clothing, in my opinion, but also there's a bit of exclusivity that happens with the product and the amount of quantity and the supply and demand ratio of particular products within fashion. You see this a lot in sneaker culture, where there's a bit of planned exclusivity so that supply never truly reaches demand. And there's always a desire for a particular product coming from a particular designer or company. The exclusivity factor, whether planned or unplanned, definitely plays a big role in those people who feel in the club and others who feel outside of the club. And only a certain amount of people get to be in the club at a particular moment in time, whether it's with a product or a community or a genre within fashion. And if you're not inside the club, you don't get why these people act the way they act. And as a result, it puts you more firmly in this idea that fashion really isn't for me. Like, these people are crazy the way they act. Like, they kind of act like a cult organization, whether it's like a hype beast who loves Supreme or a denim junkie or a girl who loves her, Shein hauls or something. I don't know. Opinion number 1, fashion isn't for everyone. Number 2, nothing is timeless. One of the more stronger feelings I have is rooted in this idea that fashion marketers, YouTubers, and social medias like to help you justify your purchases within a product or for a particular product by labeling the product as timeless. Whether it's a pair of black trousers, a style of dress, or loafers, whatever it may be, I think for me, I find it difficult to call finite fashion objects timeless. And I understand that this idea of timelessness within fashion is an idea used to contrast what the opposite end of the spectrum is, which are trendy items. But I think every fashion item enters into trend and exits within its own cycle. Nothing truly stays on top forever. But there are items within the context of the 19th, 20th, and 21st century that signify prolonged periods of status. These prolonged periods have lasted generations and as a result have been coined under the umbrella of timelessness. I think that these items often represent what the wealthiest in a society are wearing, as well as those who are at the very top of culture within a society. Think of old money aristocrats, kings, queens, politicians, and the nouveau riche. And while there are trends that definitely do bubble up from the bottom, mass acceptance of a trend, a textile, or a particular item of clothing more times than not comes from the top and moves to the bottom. I also think it's important to highlight that this is a very Western view of status and culture. And in fact, I made an entire video about kind of debunking what causes status and what drives culture. And if you're curious about that, I'll try to link that at this point in the video. Getting back to this notion of timelessness, fashion, like music, like food and other types of culture, to me are literally a breathing aspect of society. And year to year, decade to decade, generation to generation are an ever evolving, changing aspect of societies. Which from my perspective, that change, that constant evolution is the absence of timelessness. It is the evolution of culture. Number 3, fast fashion is problematic, but so are 90+% of other fashion labels. Now, 90+% isn't a statistically accurate statistic, but it's rather a figure of speech. And I feel like in my lifetime, there have been several uproars in the communities that I'm a part of when it comes to citizens or people within a group complaining about corporate entities and how they conduct themselves. This uproar usually entails the mistreatment of the environment, the exploitation of workers, and several other factors. And if you don't know, fast fashion and fashion alike have been a huge detriment to the environment, to our ecosystem, and to the planet at large. And I think a lot of people put a lot of the onus on fast fashion, which I think is justified because the scale at which fast fashion has caused unreplicable harm to the environment is just unbelievable. In reality, I don't see businesses and the fashion labels, even outside of fast fashion, really doing anything to make the planet, the environment, or the products that they create more sustainable or better for a more sustainable future. The only difference is scale, right? A smaller brand doesn't have the scale that Shein or H&M or Forever 21 has. I used to talk a lot on this channel about sustainability and sustainable brands. In fact, I was trying to build one. I had a personal brand called Edward Joyner, but I found it to be a rather inconsequential pursuit in the grand scheme of things, so I kind of scrapped it and it's on hold for the time being. And while I think that there are a ton of brands that emphasize sustainability within their product offerings or within their packaging, when you get into the weeds about sustainable fashion, you quickly learn that there needs to be a massive overhaul done rather than trying to replace plastic packaging with recyclable ones. But it's still good, but it's just more needs to be done. Because we consume so much and because the introduction of a new season also means the introduction of everyone's newest line of clothing that is a never-ending cycle of production, consumption, discarding, and it just repeats itself over and over and over again. I just don't see how there is as much change as I would hope to see in a generation that obviously is so fixated on trying to save the environment at times. Greenwashing is a prevalent issue. Poor wages is a prevalent issue. Toxic dyeing is a prevalent issue. Waste management is an issue. How many brands that you know are actually tackling these issues, whether they're high-end luxury brands, small boutique labels, and everyone in between? From my perspective, not many. And I understand that thrifting and secondhand buying has become more and more popular, which is great, but every aspect of fashion has gotten bigger, from the fast fashion brands to the highest, largest luxury labels that are in existence. Number 4, being a fan of clothing can be an empty pursuit. I mentioned before that fashion isn't for everyone, and I said that there is a superfluous kind of nature to consuming fashion. And I wanted to re-highlight that point in particular in this number 4 opinion. Fashion, the fashion industry, the designers, the entire fashion world, to me, isn't like being a doctor or a teacher or an architect, in which I perceive to be these jobs, doctor, teacher, architect, as being crucial for the betterment of society. This isn't for everyone, of course, but for the fashion machine, big fashion is what I'll call it. Big fashion exists to rake in more money year after year, season after season, product drop after product drop, and it's meant to optimize until the very end, in my opinion. And for me, the way I try to use mental gymnastics to overcome this truism for myself is that I realize that fashion as a consumer art form is full of artists who try to inspire, enrich, and improve the lives of their supporters and constituents with the products that they create. And there are plenty of examples of artists that I support and that you probably know about too that do that. But the machine, that is the fashion industry, I think is a bit of a different story. And of course, within that machine, there are still artists who create for the love of the game. But when the love of the game is in bed with power, money, and business outcomes, it becomes a bit fluid, as Stephen A would say. It becomes a bit confusing, honestly, for a lack of better words. To me, for a lot of luxury items, there's no deeper meaning beyond just how can we rake in as much money as possible. That's why it costs $200 to make a pair of loafers from Gucci, but $1,000 is what they sell it at. I mean, the quality doesn't always match the actual craftsmanship. I said this in my podcast episode about this topic, 5 unpopular opinions, but sometimes fashion can get a bit exhausting because it always feels like you're on the hamster wheel of things. New collections are always coming out and you always have to be excited about them or always be talking about them or always have an opinion about them. At least that's what I feel for myself. And, it just gets to be a bit exhausting. Luckily, I've found some new niche aspects of fashion that I feel like are really interesting. But let me know if you've ever felt that before as well. If fashion, does it get exhausting to you? Number 5, fashion. Wait, what was number 5? Okay, I got it. Number 5, social media has done more good for the fashion industry and for fashion as a whole than bad. People love to hate on and criticize social media, but to me, social media has always been a reflection of human activity and human consciousness at scale. I hear it all the time. Social media is the downfall of society and youth culture and children and all the things. To me, it's a bit dramatic because if you look at the history of the world, then you'll know that there have been many, many more things, and there are currently current events going on that are much worse than the social media epidemic that we all seem to be in. And sometimes I just reflect and I say to myself, I'd rather be Drew Joyner in 2023 than in any time in human history. That's just my opinion though. Again, regardless, I think social media as a whole has done more good for fashion than harm. More people than ever care about fashion and are conscious of the decisions that they make and how they impact the environment around them. There are more communities engaging and conversating around fashion. And from my perspective, social media has played a huge role in me learning about the fashion industry and basically getting a what I would call equivalent to a university degree in the things that I care about within the fashion industry for $0 Especially when I step outside of my home in Colorado, or when I did as a kid, there just wasn't as much fashion stuff going on. It's not to say that social media doesn't have its pitfalls, especially when it comes to fashion and overconsumption, but with all of its pitfalls, I think it's done a great job of democratizing fashion as a whole for millions, if not millions, then hundreds of thousands of kids, men and women who wouldn't have otherwise cared about fashion. And it's made it possible to spread ideas really quickly. Like if someone is wearing their jacket in a particular way and it catches wind on the proper social media algorithms, it becomes a new breathing, living aspect of the culture for however long that period is for the style or product. And I think that's really cool. It's a special thing about the time that we're living in. it just didn't happen before, right? Like the only way that you'd be able to experience other cultures in the past is if you had the money to be able to fly. But now you just have to have the money to have any version of this cell phone, and you can experience a whole different world. I think that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty cool. What are some of your unpopular fashion opinions? And let me know down in the comments whether you agreed or disagree with mine. Now, don't go off in the comments and say something wild. Like, no one wants that with their life. If you feel like I offended you, if you feel like I offended you in any way, I'm sorry. That was not my intention. I got love for each and every one of you who watches my videos, and that's why I always say at the end of the videos, as always, I'm spreading peace, love, and positivity in 2023. So that means I'm spreading peace, love, and positivity to you from me. Wherever you are in the world, have a wonderful rest of your day. And I mean that. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Abianto. Peace. So what is good post vid? Here's a fist bump for the one time bop. This is actually my second time filming this video. The first time I wasn't in the best headspace when I filmed it, but this one felt a lot better. I have a bit of a headache right now. I don't know if you can tell just by the way I'm talking. You probably can't tell, but I've been dealing with a headache and it's just annoying. But regardless, the post vid question of the day is, I'm a big basketball fan, and even if you're not a big basketball fan, look up who's in the NBA playoffs and let me know who you think is going to win the NBA championship. I think it's going to go to the hometown team, which is my hometown team, the Denver Nuggets. I think they're up 2-0 against the Lakers right now. I think the Joker and their chemistry, barring no injuries, have a great chance of bringing home the victory. And hopefully I can go to one of their games before they close out this championship run, because that would be really special. Regardless, have a wonderful rest of your day, guys. See you in the next upload. Peace.